Now back to the subject of doing things right. Maybe you can tell me the answer to this one. Why is it that a salesman will try to second-guess whether or not a prospect will buy before he ever talks to him? I've known salesmen that would tell me that they could determine just by the way a prospect walks whether or not he would buy a car. Well, I have always felt that people like that were real experts because every time they told me ahead of time that a certain person would not buy, they were right. They didn't buy. They have never yet closed one deal that they knew beforehand would not buy. They have been right every time. But you know, I never was that bright. I've always kind of figured that there was only one of us that knew exactly what it was going to take to close the deal, and that one person was the prospect. He knew how much he already owed. I didn't know. He knew what he owed on the old car. I didn't know that either. He knew what someone else had offered him in trade for his car. I only wish that I knew. And I hate to admit it, but I guess I just never was smart enough to second-guess a buyer before I talked to him. I'll never forget one hot Saturday afternoon in my home dealership several years ago. I was just standing around with all the other salesmen wishing for 6 o'clock to come around just as fast as it would when an old Chevrolet drove up in front of the dealership. Now, it wasn't the kind of a trade-in that you'd get excited about, and from its license we recognized that it was a car from the neighboring town of Jacksonville. The man and his wife got out and walked toward the showroom, and every salesman to a man got interested in doing something else. The last thing they wanted to do on Saturday afternoon was to talk to a shopper from out of town, who in everybody's opinion was just out looking for a windfall deal or a lot of useless conversation. These people were prejudged to be a couple of nothing balls, and no one wanted to waste their time with them. Well, since I was the nearest guy to the front door, and since no one else was interested, I decided to be as friendly as I knew how to be, as warm and as cordial as I would like to have a salesman be to me if I were shopping in Longview or Kilgore or Dallas. So I stepped up, introduced myself first, waited for his name, and insisted on getting it. Then I invited them to sit down and begin to talk about Jacksonville, their hometown, and the friends that I had over there, and the ice began to melt. My dealer had taught me some time before that people do not argue good sitting down. Nature has made us in such a way that we do our best and most aggressive arguing while we are standing up. So get them in the chair, he said, more times than I can remember. As long as a prospect stays on his feet and wanders around the showroom, that's how long the customer will sell the salesman. That's how long the customer will be in command. A truer statement has never been made. Stop and think. Have you ever seen a lawyer argue a good case sitting in a chair? Never. Have you ever seen a minister preach a good sermon sitting on a bench? Never. Have you ever seen a wife win an argument with a neighbor about the chickens getting into the flower bed while she sat in a hammock and sipped on a Coke? Never. Why? Because you simply do not argue good sitting down. If this makes sense, don't let your prospect run foot races all over the place. Anchor him before you try to sell him. So we talked briefly about the couple's family, some pleasant chatter about his job. He worked for the post office department in Jacksonville. We exchanged some pictures of the kids, talked lodge affiliations and civic interest, and in less than 5 minutes I was on the inside selling out. I was in like Flint. It would probably be wise to drop this thought at this point. In those first 5 minutes, friends, do not overact. Most people are sensitive about their families and their jobs and their friends, and if you ask a question about them, give the answer a serious reception. Respond to the answers as though these people were the world's most important couple, and to you right now they are. Show some concern, then listen to their opinions and comment on them. Don't ever let them think that you're pulling their leg when you comment on the 3 children looking like Dad. He wants sincerity on your part, and if you can't keep a straight face, you had better pass up the idea altogether. No one likes to feel that they're being laughed at, and insincerity on your part can be interpreted in no other way. Now, back to my story. This couple listened with interest, because here was a salesman that had a personal interest in their welfare and seemingly enjoyed talking with them. Here was a young man that wanted to warrant their confidence. Here was an individual, although a salesman, that was trying his best to be a human being, and it worked. Did I try to sell him anything? You bet your last buck I did. Every time I opened my mouth, I sold as hard as I knew how to sell from the beginning. He knew I was serious in getting his name on the line, because salesmanship is not idle conversation. It is conversation with a purpose, direct, constantly pushing for decisions, taking advantage of every item of information that develops from the questions and the answers in the first 5 minutes. And believe me, I made every second count that day. And when it was all finished, they knew that they had been sold a car. But the key was that first 5 minutes when PEOPLEOLOGY sold and the ice of resistance melted. The records prove the wisdom of that Saturday afternoon, because over the next year or so, these fine people became my great sales friends. And day after day, month after month, they continue to bring their neighbors to Tyler to buy their cars from our dealership. Never a dime would they take for their interest in their neighbor's deal. They just wanted the same kind of treatment for their friends that they had received that hot Saturday afternoon from a very green young salesman. You know, ever since then, I realized that I would never be smart enough to quarterback a prospect as to whether or not he will buy until I have studied him at close range. Years later, I was telling this story to a friend of mine that is a fine salesman in Pennsylvania, and he made a sage observation that I had overlooked for many years of my selling life when he said this: Heartsill, by accident, you stumbled onto a truth that has helped me sell for years. A truth that a lot of people don't seem to ever learn, and it's this: nobody argues with a pleasant man. Nobody argues with a pleasant man. This started me to thinking. I began to click off in my mind the people that I spend my money with. There's Jerry Stein, my clothier, a nicer, more pleasant, eager to serve human you'll never meet. We always talk business, economics, and the State of the Union. We disagree, but he never loses his pleasant atmosphere. Then there's my family doctor, and I'll put John Lassane up against any physician from coast to coast as the champion of all champions in the doctor's circle for having a constant smile, a pleasant word, a thoughtful suggestion for everybody that he meets, and there is no exception. How about Mr. Reno down at the bank? He hasn't ever looked down his long nose as if to ask if I had lost my cotton-picking mind. The reverse is always true. You can't go into the door of that bank without a friendly handshake, a concerned question in behalf of your personal interest. He likes people, and I like him. Then my mind goes to George Sasson, the manager of a Kroger grocery store where I trade. Thousands of customers, big problems in money management, salesmen and peddlers, unhappy wives and bill collectors in his hair every hour of the day. But just let me walk into that side door, and it's, "Hiya, Mr. Wilson. Give my best to Mrs. Wilson. Been missing her around here the last couple of days." He's been missing us? With that mob on his neck? How about that? I enjoy spending my money with him. Yes, sir? Like my friend said, you just can't argue with a pleasant man. And strangely enough, everybody that I trade with is a pleasant person, 100%. But do you know why? Because I am not about to spend my money intentionally with a sour mouth. Life is too short, and places to spend are too many. There are probably hundreds of people in your own sales area that are looking for a pleasant salesman to buy from, and it might as well be you. If you have any questions about the importance of peopleology in selling, remember this. Almost 80% of the decisions that are made are emotional reasons, and slightly more than 20% by reason of fact. Therefore, if the greater majority of selling is done through the sensitive feel of emotions, you should be a past master at the art and capitalize on the source of the majority of decisions, peopleology. Emotions have a lot of facets, not the least of which is that of first opinions, and first opinions are normally formed in two ways. First of all, for the first things that you say, which is what we've been talking about these last few minutes. The second is the things that meet the eye, that helps to add to your image as a businessman and as a professional. Down in Dallas, Texas, some years ago, I walked into a dealership managed by a good friend of mine, got acquainted with a new salesman they had recently hired to sell new cars. He was a young fella, but he was filled with vigor and willingness to do whatever was necessary to improve his ability to sell better. The sales manager and I agreed that here was a young man that had all of the primary ingredients to become a top sales producer. So at the sales manager's suggestion, I decided to spend at least a little extra time to help him open the door to the future that he wanted to fill with great promise. Because of his keen interest, we talked almost 2 hours about the ways and means to create good atmosphere in closing, the need for product knowledge of both yours and the competitor's merchandise, good prospecting methods that best fitted him, and on down the subject until we came to peopleology. And this subject excited this young man. He ate it up like a hungry kid with an ice cream cone. Then came his chance to put all of this discussion to work. A young couple walked in the showroom door. A very neat, well-dressed couple, obviously successful, and it was his next up, so he charged into action like a wild stallion. My real concern was that he might overplay the part, but he shifted his gears and was doing a masterful job when I went back to the dealer's office, greatly satisfied with the time that I invested with him. 45 minutes later, I came out of the dealer's office, and he was still working with that couple, and he was doing an aggressive selling job. He had his back to me so that I was looking into the face of the young couple. The young husband's expression was one of keen interest. He was totally absorbed in what the young salesman was saying, but the wife was slowly backing up in an effort to put a few feet between her and the salesman. She was becoming disenchanted with the whole affair. I knew that something was wrong, so I walked around the outer wall of the showroom until I could get a good look into the salesman's face, and there it was. Dangling out of the corner of his mouth was the soggiest, nastiest-looking cigar that I have ever seen in my life. Just hanging there in all of its sloppiness, a nauseating package of brown juices. And I could tell at a glance that the young lady wanted one just like it. I caught his eye. I motioned to him to get that filthy thing out of his mouth while he was talking to the customer, especially a woman. He got the message immediately. He snatched it out of his mouth, but do you know where he put it? He put it in his pocket. Well, needless to say, he didn't make the deal. But he did learn a great lesson. When you want to sell like a professional, you've got to act like a professional. Learn to look like a pro and act like a pro. And let your personal habits add to your profile of success instead of distracting from your overall image. Now, believe me, I'm not anti-cigaristic in any sense of the word. But if you do smoke, watch the effects in a closed room, even if it's a cigarette. Few things will irritate a prospect more than an unwanted shaft of smoke in the eyes or the nostrils of a non-smoker, and 54% of the people that you will meet will fall in that group. So let's add up our PEOPLEOLOGY score for a minute. Do you make a consistent effort to get acquainted with as many people as you can? There is no such thing as too many friends. Can you be a warm, interested person when you meet a prospect? Ask personal and interesting questions, get on a first-name basis, talk about the family and the job in such a way that the ice of resistance can be melted. Get your prospects seated so that you will reduce the possibility of undue resistance. Can you, in sincerity, approach your customer as Will Rogers did with everyone that he met, with a determination to like that man, whomever he may be? Can you find wisdom in my Pennsylvania salesman friend's observation that nobody argues with a pleasant man? Do you have at least 12 people of big influence working for you, making the selling of your product easier? Can you subdue the urge to pass judgment on the prospect's ability to buy until you have had the opportunity to let him tell you what his problems are? Can you express an interest in the welfare of your new prospects without overacting the part, and yet with it all never lose sight of the fact that you are there to sell, and sell as hard as you know how to sell? Now, if you can add up a reasonable score on all these points, your PEOPLEOLOGY is in pretty good condition, and there is much to look forward to in your adventure into good selling. And the good Lord willing, someday it may be my pleasure to drop into your place of business, to see your sales accomplishments and your success. And when I do, you'll have to give me the honor of saying in all sincerity to you, well, goody for you, and this time I'll mean it. So long for now. See you later.